Hi friends, this is John. I'm passionate about developing regenerative agriculture systems that improve soil health, produce crops that are completely resistant to diseases and insects, and produce food of such an exceptional quality that we can have a legitimate conversation about growing food as medicine. I've been fortunate to meet many people with incredible knowledge and information about soil and plant systems. However, much of this knowledge and information is scattered all over the place. I founded Advancing Eco-Agriculture in 2006 to bring this knowledge together in a more coherent fashion and incorporate it into products and growing systems that growers can easily put into practice. It's my personal mission to have these regenerative agriculture systems become the mainstream globally, the status quo against which all other growing systems are compared. To achieve this goal, I want to share the knowledge that we have learned in the last decade and make it available to everyone. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, or topics that you would like for me to discuss, please connect on social media or email me, john@regenerativeagriculturepodcast.com. Be sure to sign up for our email list at regenerativeagriculturepodcast.com. Hope you enjoy, and thank you for listening.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast. It's John Kemp once more, and I'm very pleased to be able to have a conversation with Derek Axton from Canada today. This is going to be a bit of a different conversation than you may have heard in the past, and the distinct difference for me, at least, is that Derek and I haven't known each other for a long time. But I've certainly interviewed other people that I haven't known for a long time as well, but I may have read a lot of their work and been familiar with their work. And for Derek, that's not so much the case. So this is very much new territory for me. We're going to have a fun conversation. I know that Derek has a lot to contribute, and his name has certainly come up as a grower that many would be wise to emulate. So Derek, thank you very much for joining us today. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. We're going to have a good time.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey, your pathway? What has been the pathway that brought you to the work that you're doing today in your farm, and where have you come from?
Yeah, to start with, thanks, John, for having me, and this will be a good conversation to have. So to start from the beginning, I guess it's the same story I pretty much tell everyone that, for us, it was a chance trip to Dakota Lakes Research Farm in 2007. And one of the very first things that Dr. Back took me out and showed me was an irrigator, obviously irrigating. And he asked the group of us that were there, how much rain we thought was entering the soil, in the form of irrigation. And we all guessed, kind of a half an inch, because there was no visible runoff. We were right beside the irrigator. And he tells us that it's 2 inches in 9 minutes. And for me, back then, that was an impossibility. In our area where we farm now, if we would have got a 2-inch downpour, obviously in 9 minutes, the bulk of it's going to run away. And we know we live in an arid environment. We're sort of a 12 to 14-inch annual precipitation zone. And the most limiting factor on our farm, we feel, is moisture. So that was very powerful to witness that. So
2 inches in 9 minutes.
2 inches in 9 minutes. Yeah, that got my attention. And we got off the golf cart and walked in behind the irrigator. It had just passed, and we could walk in our sneakers, and you didn't get mud on your shoes. So
wow.
Yeah. So it was pretty much just tell me what to do, because I need this in my life, because like I said, moisture is number one for us. Now I've learned there's so much room for improvement. So he talked to us about, diversity and crop rotation, things that, we grew 3 crops at the time. We thought we were diverse. Basically 2 crops is an alternation, not a rotation. And we were growing 3, but we didn't ever think about warm and cool season crops and how to build rotation to improve soil structure and do all these things that we want to do to make the water enter the soil. Talked about earthworm channels and soil structure. And it's the first time in my life I ever saw someone put a shovel in the soil and show us aggregates. That was just words that we didn't talk about. So I'm a slow learner, so it took me quite a few trips back there. And along the way, one time I wound up in a chance meeting with Gabe Brown. And he invited us to his farm on the way back from Dakota Lake. And same thing. It was, the shovel in the soil, and talked about rotation and what we can do with live roots and the power of live roots to build structure. Because Gabe is similar to us. I think they're in an 18-inch rainfall zone. So I guess for me, it was easier to relate. He's only about 5 hours from my farm. As far as weather patterns and growing conditions and those sort of things, it's fairly close to what we can see some years. And we were in one of his paddocks, and he put his shovel in the soil, and it was the most beautiful, black, crumbly, wonderful chocolate cake, whatever you like to call it, soil. And we walked across the grid road and put a shovel in his neighbor's soil, and I'm sure he's got the most famous neighbor, and looked at, and it was minting. Like, it was exactly like what we had at home. So the difference between the poor soil and the wonderful soil was management, right? So that for us was, well, we can do this. This was done in a matter of 10 or 12 years. So we need to do this. We need to make changes. We need to make drastic changes, And when you talk with Gabe, he doesn't talk about inputs right? We talk about growing things. That's how the conversation goes. So we don't have livestock, so it was a bit of a challenge, to come home and figure out how to input this diversity into our farm. And the simplest thing was we discovered intercropping, and that's where it started. 2011, we started growing our first intercrops, which are 2 different crops grown together at the same time. I guess 2 or more. We do 2 for the most part. And we seed them together, and we harvest them together. I know there's a bunch of different variations, but that's kind of what works in our short growing season. Started in 2011. By 2015, all of our broadleaf acres, which is approximately half of our farm, was all intercrops. So we started with some simple ones like canola pea, which is pretty common. But we soon realized that I didn't want to have canola seed on my farm, so we transitioned into mustard, which is a higher value, lower yielding crop. And we use that with the peas, and we grow mostly specialty peas, winter peas, forage peas, those sort of things that go into the cover crop market or into sprouting. And those peas generally are kind of a jerk to harvest. They want to lay down, but when you put them with a brassica, they'll trellis, and it just works really, really well. So we did that. Flax and chickpeas was another big one for us. Chickpeas growing monocrop can be a bit of a disease problem, and we learned through a research farm at Redverse, Saskatchewan, and through another friend, Colin Rosengren, that had been doing this previous to me. And like I said earlier, I guess that our farm was sort of just a big group of stolen ideas from other farms. And the flax chickpea definitely wasn't ours, but we soon seen the benefit, and we adopted it straight away. And it completely changed chickpea production for us. We went from it being a 4 fungicide pass crop to none, with better quality outcome.
Wow, that is impressive.
That was a pretty big change for us. We had actually quit growing chickpeas because I had made the decision we don't use insecticides, we don't use seed treatments, we don't use fungicides unless we're going to lose a crop. I mean, the fungicide, I'm not going to die on that hill, but that is never in the plan. And chickpeas, when you grow chickpeas here, it's in the plan. But in the intercrop situation, 9 years out of 10, we can get away with no fungicides, and then obviously better quality seed. So that was huge. We've tried other combinations, but those are kind of the ones we've fallen on. Flax with lentils is another one. I guess we grow on a fairly large percentage of the farm. So there's the benefits, the harvestability, the lack of disease. All these things work really well with the intercrops. But the other neat thing is, I'm sure you're aware, when a straight legume crop, the problem with your carbon nitrogen ratio after harvest, your residue just disappears, it just melts. But we found with changing the carbon nitrogen ratio mix of the residue after harvest, we get a lot longer, more robust residue cover that helps us through the winter and then into next year's spring. So we can actually keep our soils covered with some form of armor. Because sometimes we just don't have enough time in the fall to get a fall seeded cover. That's probably our biggest challenge yet. And the intercrops have really, really changed that for us. Other neat things about intercrops for me was when we started, we just made the conscious decision to not use synthetic fertility. That was sort of our, for lack of a better term, gateway drug to not using synthetic. And we just didn't use it, and we didn't see a difference from our previous yields. And then by 15, so half the farm was not using synthetics, and that just gave us the confidence to keep backing away.
Wow. So you just continued using fertilizers, and you did not see any yield loss from that once you started doing the intercropping?
Yeah. So it's interesting. And when we talk about intercrops, we talk about this land equivalency ratio. So it's like, imagine you have 2 50-acre fields and you plant 1 to canola and 1 to peas. And you harvest them separately, and that would be a 1 as far as your net profit. And if we planted both 50-acre fields and harvested them, you generally, it's quite a bit higher. Like our farm was about a 1.25. I know farms that are 1.35, and I know there's a research farm that's seen upwards of 1.85.
Wow, that is so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and with that comes other benefits like the residue, the the harvestability. There's a lot of things that come with that you don't see maybe in your balance sheet. So yeah, intercrops have been a big part of it. We were doing these things, and my wife had taken Elaine Ham's Life in the Soils classes, and we got very interested in biology, soil biology, because you go to different presentations and you hear people say the word biology or soil health, and we talk about it like it's air. Really, you can. And the fact that we were able to learn how to identify basically good and bad and things that we want to see and things that maybe we don't want to see, and how it's possible to manage those things was a pretty powerful tool. And I remember the very first time Tanis made a slide and looked at it under the microscope, and we were fairly confident we were doing a pretty good job. We had been intercropping and cover cropping, and we'd been no-till, and we weren't using much synthetics, and we kind of had it figured out. And when we first looked at that slide and it was mostly bacteria, I tell you, that was pretty disappointing. We were expecting to see everything she had been learning about seeing fungi and protozoa, and there was the odd one, but boy, you had to look a long time. So the next step was to make the compost windrows here. We make about 2,000 tons a year now. And then we select from that 2,000 tons. Generally, it's more than one different windrow. And we use that to make a compost extract. And we put that down at seeding, sort of in a liquid mixture with our micronutrients. That's what goes in furrow, which, again, was a really good crutch for us. We learned early on that was a nice way to transition from, the liquid starter that we had been using to this. Was a fairly easy transition, low cost. And drastic's not the right word, but we've seen very good improvement in soil microbiology since we started using that. And I think we'll continue that for quite some time. It's easy to do, it's low cost.
What is the total of your nutrition management and biology management today? Are you applying the compost tea in furrow? Are there any nutrients with that? Any other types of biostimulants or inoculants? What's the scope of the nutrition management that you're doing?
So like this past year, we had a tiny bit of molasses and a few biological foods. I kind of think of it like, obviously we're putting the biology out, and obviously they function off plant root exudates, but when we put it with a seed, there are no exudates. So we do put a little bit of molasses and our micronutrients that we use, that we basically kind of figured out from looking at sap tests. And we did a full extraction of our soils back years ago when we first started with this, and that was sort of how we based it, and we've used sap analysis since to fine tune. So that's how we come up with our micros, and we add that then to our compost extract just before it goes to the field. Molasses and a few other odds and ends. Nothing spectacular or shattering, just cheap biological foods, and it's been seeming to work fairly well.
Well, based on this, on what you're describing, it does seem to be working fairly well. It seems to be a bit of an understatement. One of the questions that immediately comes to mind, you described the increased yields that you're seeing just as a factor of the intercropping. Have you noticed any improvements in quality from all the various things that you're doing?
Yes, I guess is the short answer. We provide seed, obviously, for cover crop seed, but we also do sprouting. So then again, it has to grow. And we've had very consistently high germination in things since we started doing this. And I can't explain why, but I know like in sprouting, we have to be upper 90s for them to want to accept those. Even the cover crop seed, most people want to see, germination in the high 90s. The higher the better, obviously. But germination we've seen an improvement for sure in our grains after, and I guess that's one metric to measure it by. And another thing we've started doing is nutrient density testing with Dr. Jill Copperton. She's developed a fairly good method to test nutrients of our grains, and according to what she's seen of ours and the comparisons she's done, I guess I shouldn't speak for her, but there are some things that they look at. I know zinc is one of the things that she looks at specifically, and industry kind of thinks 20 is good, 25 is really good in a cereal grain, and we've been seeing sort of upper 30s, lower 40s in our zincs, like as an example. So that's been another metric we're measuring, and I think that's something hopefully we can use to help us market our grains more towards the human consumption side instead of the seed.
One of the topics I'd love to get your perspective on, you described at the beginning of our conversation how impressive the soil was at the Dakota Lakes Research Farm with that tremendous water infiltration. And I'm sure you've mentioned that you've seen some of those changes happening on your farm as well. What do you think are the biggest and the most significant contributing factors? Has it been the diversity of crops? Has it been the compost applications, combination of both? And within all of this, what is the impact of tillage?
Okay, so I don't, that's a tough one to answer. This is probably opinion, but I think it's a combination of things. I guess one other practice that we've been doing now for 5 seasons is controlled traffic farming. Still not 100% convinced it's the end all, but we've been doing it. I think a combination of everything contributes, but we have been doing consistent amounts of infiltration tests on our farm. And when we compare soils that we've been farming this way for since 2011 to some soils that we just took on last year, a farm we bought beside us, we try to go out after a significant rainfall. So when we have profile and then do our tests, and we'll get the first inch in, say, 25 to 35 seconds, and the second inch will be 9 to 10 minutes on our better soils and we'll go across the road to this, same kind of parent material, and we'll see under, basically the first inch. After 10 minutes, we just kind of quit measuring. So there's definite differences, and I really wish I could put my finger on what certain thing we do makes a difference. But I think if I had to pick one thing at the end of the day, I think it's live roots. I think that's the thing we need to focus on. And I don't know if it matters specifically which live roots, but just more of them, as far as, growing days. If we can have more live roots putting more carbon back in the soil via the root exudates, and that's how I feel personally anyway.
When you're doing your intercropping, are you ever doing more than 2 species together? And would there be additional soil benefits to doing additional species together?
So we have tried 3-way intercrops for sure, and we did see improvement in yield again. And I probably wouldn't be able to comment accurately. I probably tend to think that it would be, but at the time, the way we're set up to separate our intercrops is 3 is a very difficult procedure, where 2 is very simple and fast. So we just sort of abandoned that until we're actually building a new seed facility right now. And that was in our mind when we were doing this, because I think I can see us going back to trying 3, because there's some definite benefits to that. One other thing we have done is incorporate like clovers into, say, a pea canola or a pea mustard. So that gives us, say, another live root that will grow past harvest and give us the diversity, but we don't necessarily have to harvest it. And I kind of like to think of those companions, as a bridge for lots of things. Obviously they'll help with mycorrhizae, because when you're growing a brassica, but then the big problem with us is we have such a short fall, we can't get a cover in good time. There's sort of crop maturity, and then crop dry down, harvest, seeding the cover crop emerges. This can be a 5-week process of nothing growing in the soil, where if we have a companion like a clover that just grows under the canopy, and once we remove the canopy, the light penetrates, and then the companion can take off and provide that live root for the soil until freeze up. And that's been working fairly well for us. That's been one that I got to actually do more of.
Yeah, I know that was a practice that we used to use on the farm that I was growing up on our fresh market vegetables, is we would grow a legume underneath vine crops. And as the fall approached, the vine crops died off because of frost. They no longer shaded the ground, and we instantly had a legume that would take over.
Yeah, I think it's great. Part of me wants to transition that now to some sort of a grass, and I don't actually know which grass to use, but I got a bit of a feeling that we have too many legumes in rotation. It was same again. It was a kind of a crutch for nitrogen, but we're sort of learning that nitrogen isn't nearly as difficult as I thought it was 4 or 5 years ago. So I think we can start backing away from some of our legume-based intercrops and see what the future brings, but especially these companions as well. I think we need some kind of a grass, but like things like ryegrass, I'm just scared of them becoming a weed, so we haven't experimented with them yet. Maybe you have some suggestions?
I don't have any immediate or obvious suggestions because I'm not familiar enough with your environment. But I would like to go back to your comment about nitrogen. We've also experienced that nitrogen very easy. So what has your process been with nitrogen? Are you able to supply 100% of the crop's requirements with crop residues and what is in the soil profile?
So what we've done is, like I said, we don't provide any fertility to the legume-based intercrops, which is about half the farm acreage, and then the other half of the farm will be different cereal crops. Barley, oats, wheat, durum. We grow spelt. We grow some other ancient cereals, and what we've been doing ahead of those is we actually spread. We're still using ammonium sulfate. I know. I'm sure everyone knows. I spread sort of low amounts, kind of 80 to 100 pounds. Gives us a little bit of an end kick and a little bit of sulfur. And I think it's there again, probably a bit of a crutch because it really isn't that much N in terms of units. It's like 16 pounds of N. Like this year, for example, we can grow 150 bushel oats on 16 units of N. If you did the old typical removal rate, something's wrong, right? It's coming from somewhere. And that's sort of what we've been experiencing. And when we look at our SAP results, our ammonium levels are very high. Our nitrate levels are very low to almost non-existent. So I'm assuming we're getting some kind of soil-derived N. I guess I wish I knew more of the specifics, but yeah, that's how we feel it's going.
I'm quite curious, what led you down the pathway of considering controlled traffic? And actually, before you answer that question, I had a very interesting conversation earlier this summer with Jerry Hatfield and Michael McNeil when I visited with them for a weekend. And Jerry described how when no-till was first introduced and first advocated very strongly, there were 5 rules, foundational rules that were considered to be necessary for successful no-till. And rule number 1 was that you remove all compaction from the soil profile. And rule number 2 was you do everything necessary to avoid recreating compaction layers in the soil. Those were considered really foundational to having successful no-till. And it seems to me, based on observations on a lot of farms, that the no-till movement has collectively seems to have lost sight of that. And you described in our earlier conversation how you used to be farming no-till, but not seeing results. Now you're doing all these additional things. So I'd be curious on your take on that. What is your reaction?
Well, it really lines up. So the big turning point for me, I guess, was there's a Nuffield scholar in Alberta by the name of Steve LaRock who did his Nuffield on controlled traffic farming. And same thing, we're lucky enough, it's sort of a 8-hour drive from my farm. And I went to 2 of his field days. And once again, so this would have been maybe 2011 or 12 when we were doing this, sort of the same time we were really thinking about making major changes, realize that, we need to change drastically. We need to make major changes. And so Steve was pretty much conventional, shank opener, basically high fertility, high yield, relatively low diversity. But it was maybe 5 or 6 years, and his soil structure was the closest I'd ever seen to Dakota Lakes and Gabe Brown's farm as anywhere I'd ever been. To me, that was just another way to get there. And I'm sure after a conversation you realize impatience may be the wrong word, but I just want it fixed now. And so instead of just doing one thing and hoping for the best, let's just do everything we possibly can to improve the resource, to improve the soil. And I thought control traffic was a fit. And it's funny now that we've got into it, how many doors it's opened, as far as things like maybe relay seeding and some things that we're going to start experimenting with. Last year, we experimented with relay seeding into standing cereal crops, trying to get our covers established sooner. And control traffic has opened doors to that we didn't even realize were there. When I look at farms like Dakota Lakes and Gabe's, and they are doing a phenomenal job, and I look around their yard and look at how big their equipment is, nothing's very heavy in comparison to the 65,000 pound tractors that we use, that sort of thing, and very heavy combines. And, we're out making passes at times of the year when we really shouldn't be from a soil perspective. So this gives us more sort of the freedom to go harvest the crop or seed the crop, maybe at times that we shouldn't be, but it allows us to travel in the fields without doing damage, I guess, was sort of part of my thoughts. And I've had pretty good conversations with Jody in Minnesota, Jody DeYoung Hughes, who's done a lot of research on this. And I'm probably paraphrasing this wrong, but she basically told me that not much compaction happens when it's really dry or saturated, like really, really wet, like almost water. It's when soils are almost that perfect, nice moisture for seeding or in the spring, then when, compaction can really occur badly and to depth. So I guess from taking all those little bits from a whole bunch of different sources, it just seemed to me that if we're dead serious about this water infiltration thing, that's something we're just going to have to do. And I think it takes time to see results. So we're in our 5th year now, and I think we're starting to finally see some results.
I was just prepared to ask about that. What observations do you have now at the 5-year mark? What are you seeing?
Well, the water infiltration for sure. Like, we don't even check on trams. There's not much sense checking there. But those better fields, like I talked about, sort of the 32nd inch, those are in the fields that have been the longest CTF under our management, that have got to compost and had covered crops. And that's been the trend. Even walking in our fields, and I've had that comment we've had quite a few visitors come in the summer, and people notice that when we walk in the fields. And I'm sure you've felt the same too, when you get in those really healthy soils, that the soils are soft, to the foot, it seems like. And I'm not saying that what we do is the only way to do things. It's just been our observations, and it's been a fit for us so far.
Derek, as you've been on this pathway and experiencing different things on your own farm, what has been something that was unexpected? What surprised you?
What surprised me? A few things. I still struggle with that, obviously, because I'm still spreading nitrogen, and I have, according to my SAPs, I have lots, but we still do it, I guess, out of forced habit.
With the nitrogen example, we actually have a lot of experience with SAP analysis and looking at nitrogen. And maybe you need to do an experiment like you did at the beginning, and just don't apply it on a certain section, just see what happens.
Yeah, I think so. I've actually left a couple checks already, so that's good. But I need to do some random replicated, I think, is what I need, because that's one of the other beautiful things of control traffic, is it allows us to do so many studies, because not that every pass is the same, but there's definitely more consistency in what we do. And we have these paths that we can follow. We can do random replicates a little bit easier. And I think that's something that's definitely on the to-do list for 2020. That's probably one of my big surprises. But the fact that we can make significant change to, like, our soil quality, I know soil health, whatever you like to call it, but the color change, it just makes you feel good to look in the soils and see the color change. It's so hard to explain, but we had a lady, Marla Mintz, was here from the Furrow and did an article on us this summer. And one of the things she really wanted to show was that. And we found a field there again that we took on last year, and versus some of our better fields, and the color changes. I had actually never put them side by side on the same shovel, and it was drastic. How much darker and much more porous the soils were side by side. I've been in one field and then drove to a different field and looked, but to put them side by side, I thought was very powerful. And I didn't expect that we could make that change in that amount of time. I guess it's sort of like watching your kids grow up. You don't notice them getting taller, but if you go away for a couple of years and come back, wow, there's been a big change here. So that was one of my most surprising things, is that it's actually happening. You made the miles and toured and made the changes on your farm, and to actually see the changes happening, I think, are pretty gratifying.
Derek, I have a question for you that I enjoy asking people, and the way people have responded. What is something that you believe to be true about modern agriculture that is different from the mainstream view?
John, I knew this question was coming, and I still am not that prepared. I've been thinking about it quite a lot. What is one thing that really stands out for me?
Or you can pick 5 if that's easier.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways we can go with that answer. But one thing I guess that sticks out to me that maybe people will relate to, especially in times when none of us are feeling really rich, with commodity prices being down and grain prices being down, is that you don't have to be high input to be profitable, highly profitable. Then I don't think there's any correlation there at all. It seems to me that the more we back away from synthetics, the more profitable we become. And there was a point that I thought that our system was going to crash, and I'm pretty sure my neighbors still do. But it's getting better, not worse. And the profitability is, I guess, obviously that's what we're all trying to do at the end of the day. But, to watch the resource improve at the same time as profitability, that's pretty exciting, because then it's just going to continue, both of them, to get better as we move forward.
Yeah, that is a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Derek, what is a book or a resource that you would suggest to other growers who want to learn more? What has been a very useful source of information for you?
I've read all of David Montgomery's books. I think they're great. Gabe Brown's new book I really like. I thought it was very well written and just food for thought. I found, like, the intercropping, I found more so in the information for that is sort of more, well, social circles isn't the right word, but I mean it's something we've discussed among peers, and I don't know if I actually had one original idea. I think I basically just took from here and there and put together what worked on our farm. And that's something that I learned, I guess, that I should make a point of saying, is that I came home from both Dakota Lakes and Gabe Brown's farm and soon learned that I have to adapt those practices. I got to think about the context of your area, rainfall, soil types, those sort of things. And yeah, I couldn't grow 200 bushel corn in Minton, surprisingly. So we had to change up how we were thinking, and just use the general thoughts, or the general guidelines, I guess, and not the specifics. And that seemed to be what made the difference. And that's honestly why we got into intercropping, is because I saw the power that Gabe was having with their cover crops, or diverse cover crops. And I said, we need diversity. That is absolute. We need diversity. And how's the fastest way to do that is, well, for us, we thought was intercropping. And that was definitely one important piece along the way for us.
Derek, I really appreciate that comment, and I appreciate the example that you gave as well of taking the principle of diversity and shifting that principle from cover crops to the actual crops that you're producing. And I think this is a very important point for all of our listeners. Some of the feedback that I've received in the podcast in the past has been that people desire to have more practical how-to, nuts and bolts. How do you do this step by step? And that's occasionally useful, but more often, I believe, less useful, as you just described, Derek, because we have to adapt these ideas to each of our individual operations. And some ideas may be directly transferable, and many of them may not be. I think it's very important. Really, the better we understand the science, or perhaps a better word would be to say the better that we understand the principles, the concepts of what really needs to happen, then we can figure out a way to adapt those concepts and principles specifically to our operation. Valuable point. I really appreciate you bringing that out.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like to do when I do go talk to crowds here and there is try to relay my mistakes, because there's been many, and try to save some people from making the same mistakes, I guess, because I was lucky enough to sit in the seats and have someone tell me those, and yeah, minor changes can make big differences. And, and I think, like you said, I think understanding where you live and how those are going to fit in your operation is very important.
Yeah. Derek, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy it very much as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, John, for having me. And
you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
The team at AEA and I are dedicated to bringing this show to you because we believe that knowledge and information is the foundation of successful regenerative systems. At AEA, we believe that growing better quality food and making more money from your crops is possible. And since 2006, we've worked with leading professional growers to help them do just that. At AEA, we don't guess, we test, we analyze, and we provide recommendations based on scientific data, knowledge, and experience. We've developed products that are uniquely positioned to help growers make more money with regenerative agriculture. If you are a professional grower who believes in testing instead of guessing, someone who believes in a better, more regenerative way to grow, visit advancingecoag.com and contact us to see if AEA is right for you. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to working with you.